Now that we've studied the very first C# console application, let's create a C# console application from scratch. So we're going to go here to the File menu and select New and then Project, and that displays the New Project dialog. And the first thing you'll notice here is that it's already selected for me under Visual C# the Windows category, and that's because I previously used a template from that category. So if you were developing with Visual Studio and you had chosen, for example, to create an Android application, then it would have that category selected because that's the last one that you happen to look at. Now if I scroll down here, you'll see that not only can you create applications for Visual C#, but also for the programming languages Visual Basic, Visual F#, Visual C++, JavaScript, Python, TypeScript. You have lots of different capabilities built directly here into the Visual Studio IDE. And this is just the Community Edition, not the more robust editions that are available. So this is the free Community Edition with lots of capabilities. Now within the Windows category, we're going to be selecting Console Application. You want to make sure you're doing this from the Visual C# category, because otherwise if you select console application for say Visual Basic or Visual C++, the programming language will be wrong inside of your project. So you do need to make sure you're in the right category here over at the left side of this window. Now you go ahead and name the project. I'll call it Welcome 1, just like the project that we studied in the preceding video. And by default, the IDE will place your project into your user accounts documents folder underneath Visual Studio 2015 and then the projects subfolder within it. And of course this assumes you're using Visual Studio 2015. By the time you watch this video, there could potentially be a subsequent version of Visual Studio available. Now the name of the solution is automatically going to be the same name that you typed in the name field up above here, but you can go ahead and change that if you would like. I'm going to make sure that it creates a directory for my solution so that all of the files for this project get stored in the same folder, and I'm going to click OK. Now when I do that, the IDE automatically generates a little bit of source code for me in a file named program.cs. Now we decided to change the name of that file in each of our examples. So for example, if you want to do that, you can select the file and then click it again and change the name. So I typed Welcome 1 in my version of the file, and when I press enter, it's going to go ahead and ask me if I want to rename the corresponding code element that was called program. So by default it called the class program, and when I change the file name it assumes that I'd like to also change the class name. So when I say yes, it renames the class. Now when I showed you the final version of this program, you may recall that there was only one using statement, one using directive. These other four that it generates automatically are commonly used namespaces for things like data structures, which is the collections.generic namespace, link, text, and multi-threading. All of these are things that get used in lots of different types of applications. So they automatically put those in, but because we're not using them, you can simply go ahead and delete those using directives. Now separately, they also automatically wrap your class definition inside of a namespace that has the same name as your project. And we will talk about namespaces in a much later lesson, but we don't really need them for the simple programs that we're doing near the front of these live lessons videos. So for each of the examples that I show you, we will remove the namespace, and you have to remove the closing curly brace as well. And then you'll notice my code didn't realign, but if I go ahead and select all of those lines and type Shift Tab, it will bring everything to the left one indentation level. Now you may recall in the preceding video we were looking at a main method that was static void main with an empty set of parentheses. the default version of main that gets generated for you has inside the parentheses what's known as a string array called args, and this would represent command line arguments. So if I were to go into a command prompt window and type a command followed by some arguments and then press enter, those arguments would become elements of this string array, and that's something we talk about in the arrays lesson when we get to it. So I'm also going to delete that and just leave the empty parentheses here. Now, when you're working in Visual Studio, it's very helpful in terms of writing your code. It can help you write the code faster. So for example, when I press enter in between these two curly braces that define the body of main, it automatically indents the code for me. That's part of the smart indentation capabilities built into Visual Studio. And also, as I start typing, it will help me write code as well. So you may recall from the first example that we used the console class to output a line of text. So if I type capital C, you can see this window pop up, which is known as IntelliSense. And as I start typing, what it's doing is narrowing down the list of items here to only items that can be used in this context and that contain the letters I've typed so far. So if I type another letter, you see it's now narrowed down right to console. And at this point, I can just hit the tab character to complete the name because I saw that it was already highlighting the particular name that I wanted to type. Now you'll recall that I had a dot following the console class name. So when I type that dot, I get the IntelliSense window once again. And now what it's showing me is in this context, to the right of the dot, only the members of class console that I can use here. So I used the WriteLine method. So if I type a capital W, now it's showing me only items that contain a capital W. If I type an R, now it's showing me the only two items left that can be used in this context that contain a capital W and a lowercase r. And one of them is the WriteLine method. Now if I hit tab at the moment, it's only going to complete the word write because that was what was selected in the window, the IntelliSense window down below. But if I type a capital L now, excuse me, it didn't come back up, but if it doesn't come up, if you hit Control Space, it will fill in if there's only one thing that can be placed or completed at that point. Let's go back to here where there's a couple of different things that contain WRIT. So if I hit Control Space, now it pops open the IntelliSense window once again. And again, I have this list here. I'm up and down arrowing inside the list at the moment. So if I have WriteLine highlighted and I hit tab, it completes WriteLine instead of write. Now, as you might expect, this IntelliSense is going to keep coming up in lots of different cases. So for example, if I type a left parenthesis now to indicate the arguments to WriteLine, it not only puts in the closing right parenthesis, it also displays this tooltip saying that there's 19 different versions of WriteLine that we can select from here. And you can actually click these arrows to start scrolling through the different versions of WriteLine that are available to you. The particular version that we're using in this program is the version that receives a string to display. So if I now start typing, by the way, you don't have to make the selection like I did from this list here. And in fact, let me just go back and change to a different one and still type a double quote. It's going to, based on what you type, figure out which version of WriteLine you're actually going to be using. So I typed a double quote character. The IDE automatically put in the closing quote character and positioned the cursor in between them, so I can now type "Welcome to C# Programming," and I'll give an exclamation point there. And I'll now click outside, and you'll see that there's this red squiggly line over at the right side here. And if I hover over it, it tells me in a tooltip that a semicolon is expected. So it's again helping you write that code. So let me click there, and go ahead and put in the semicolon, and now the squiggly after a couple of seconds goes away once the IDE recompiles the code that I've typed so far. So at this point we've actually completed the application, and if I type Control F5 it will build the application and run the application, and you can see the program's output here in the console window. So we've now created, or recreated I should say, that first example, of course without the comments that I had in the first example. And I just want to point out one other thing at this point. So let's say for example that we remove the right parenthesis here. Now I can leave it alone and it's going to recompile the code for me and show me this red squiggly, in this case indicating that a parenthesis is expected. But I also want to show you, if you go to the build menu and say to build your solution, down here you'll get the error list window and it'll show you what the error is, and if you double click an error message it will take you to the specific point in the code that's problematic. So let's click someplace else and I'll double click, and notice it put the cursor right back where the problem is in the code. So if I go ahead and put in my right parenthesis, it'll recompile, and notice automatically now the error list window emptied out once the error message went away. So these are all just features of the IDE, and I'll point out other nice features of the IDE as I work my way with you through the examples.